Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today we're going to talk about a character the Harry Potter films largely ignored, Peter Pettigrew, a controversial and, in some ways, tragic figure. In the movies, he was portrayed as a cowardly, caricatured traitor, but the books offer a deeper and more disturbing image. Let's piece together the fragments of his life story to understand who he really was. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Pettigrew had Voldemort's wand. After Voldemort's fall in Godric's Hollow, his wand was left behind at the scene of the tragedy. Fearing that it could expose his involvement, Pettigrew took it and hid it. This wasn't just any wand, it was the twin of Harry Potter's wand, a connection that would prove crucial in future events. Years later, once his true identity was revealed, Pettigrew reclaimed his master's wand and went to Albania, hoping to find what was left of the Dark Lord. This decision sealed his fate as someone fully dependent on the will of others. Number 2. Pettigrew could communicate with other rats. Becoming an animagus is a rare and complex art, and its side effects remain largely unknown. The books hint that those who transform into animals might be able to connect with others of their kind. Peter, who spent more than 10 years as the rat Scabbers, reportedly heard from other rats about a strange presence in the forests of Albania. That's how he tracked down Voldemort. This raises questions. Did he develop this skill due to his prolonged time in animal form, or is it an ability all animagi possess? Number 3. Pettigrew took the longest to become an animagus. Sirius, James, and Peter became animagi to support Remus Lupin during his werewolf transformations. But Peter was the last to master this magical transformation. While Sirius became a huge black dog and James a majestic stag, Pettigrew had to settle for the form of a lowly rat. This shape reflected his personality: small, cowardly, insignificant. Yet ironically, this made him the perfect spy. Number 4. The Marauders saw him as weak. Though Pettigrew was technically a marauder, he never truly fit the mold. Sirius, James, and Remus were charismatic and powerful wizards, while Peter always remained in their shadow. They didn't hide their condescending attitude toward him. Sirius's decision to make Pettigrew the secret keeper for the Potters wasn't based on trust, but on strategy. "Who'd suspect Peter Pettigrew?" he said. That ironic choice cost Lily and James their lives. Number 5. Death Eaters saw Pettigrew as a traitor. After Voldemort's downfall, Peter didn't just go into hiding, he faked his own death and framed Sirius Black. To the other Death Eaters, he seemed like a coward who had betrayed the Dark Lord and led him to ruin. Bellatrix Lestrange, Barty Crouch Jr., and other fanatical followers of Voldemort despised him. Even after his return, he remained an outcast among them. No one ever saw him as an equal. Number 6. Pettigrew was awarded the Order of Merlin. When the Ministry of Magic found only Pettigrew's finger at the supposed explosion site, they believed he had died heroically at Sirius Black's hand. For his sacrifice and alleged loyalty to his friends, Peter was posthumously awarded the Order of Merlin First Class. The highest honor was given to his mother, Mrs. Pettigrew, whose first name remains unknown. The irony? The same order had been awarded to Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Lupin. So Pettigrew, who betrayed them all, officially stood among them. Number 7. Born in 1960. Very little is known about Peter's childhood. His parents are never mentioned except for a few references to his mother, simply called Mrs. Pettigrew. He was born in 1960 and entered Hogwarts in 1971. He likely spent his school years as a quiet, unnoticed boy, easily influenced by stronger personalities. His life choices, first following the Marauders, then Voldemort, were driven by fear of loneliness and a desperate need to belong to something bigger. Number 8. Pettigrew had an unusual Patronus. Peter Pettigrew could conjure a Patronus. That alone is surprising. It takes focus and hope, things Peter rarely showed. But according to extended lore, his Patronus took the shape of a rat, not a majestic animal, not a fierce one, a rat, small, nervous, built for hiding, not fighting, It matched him perfectly. A Patronus doesn't lie, it reflects the soul. And Peter's was always darting into corners, searching for safety. While James summoned a stag and Sirius a great black dog, Peter's Patronus whispered who he really was. Someone who survived by staying close to power, someone who followed, never led. Even in magic meant to protect, he revealed his fear. He didn't fight Dementors, he slipped past them. That rat-shaped Patronus wasn't just a charm, it was his truth. Just like the man who cast it, it never stood still. Number 9, he feared death more than anything. Peter Pettigrew feared death more than anything else. It ruled him. It whispered in every choice he made. When Voldemort rose, Peter didn't choose the dark because he believed in it. He chose it because he believed it would keep him alive. Sirius said it best. He always went with the strongest. He was scared. Scared of being left behind. Scared of dying. Truth didn't matter to Peter. Only survival did. That fear is what killed James and Lily. He thought Voldemort would protect him. He thought betrayal would buy him time. But the lie caught up. Years later, deep in the Malfoy manor, Peter stood in a cellar, wand raised, Harry Potter in his grasp. He was ordered to kill. 1 second of hesitation, 1 flicker of memory, maybe of the boy who once spared him. And that's when it happened. The silver hand closed around his throat. Voldemort had given it to him as a reward. Flesh, blood, and bone, the Dark Lord had said. But the gift was cursed, built with no tolerance for mercy. The hand didn't wait. It felt his weakness. It felt his pause. And it crushed the breath out of him. Peter tried to scream, but no one heard. He died in silence, choked by the very magic he trusted to save. Him. There was no battle, no grand last words, just a gasp, just a traitor's end delivered by the hand of fear itself. Peter didn't die for a cause. He didn't die for love or loyalty. He died because for the first time in years he thought of someone else. And that moment of humanity was more than Voldemort would ever allow. Number 10 lived as a rat for 12 years. Peter Pettigrew lived as a rat for 12 years, not days, not months, years. He curled up in Ron Weasley's bed, chewed on scraps, and accepted belly rubs from Fred and George. He sat in Molly Weasley's lap. He let Ginny kiss him on the nose. He lived as Scabbers, a pet, and no one, not even Dumbledore, suspected. Animagi usually shift forms for minutes, sometimes hours, never years. It takes enormous magical control to maintain a transformation that long. But Peter didn't just maintain it, he disappeared into it. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius says, he's been hiding from us for 12 years in the form of a rat. And that's exactly what he did. He gave up being human because it was safer to be vermin. The cost of that decision ran deeper than survival. Over time, Peter started thinking like a rat, sneaky, nervous, always watching for danger. His voice, when he finally transformed back, was high and thin. His eyes darted. He hunched. He begged. It wasn't an act. He'd lived too long in fear to be anything else. 12 years in that form didn't just hide him, it shaped him. He crawled into that role to escape punishment, but the longer he stayed, the more he became the thing he pretended to be, not just in body, but in soul. When he finally returned to his human form, Peter Pettigrew was no longer a boy from Gryffindor. He was something smaller, greedier, a man who traded loyalty for safety and forgot how to stand on 2 legs. Number 11, he knew the secrets of the Weasley family. For 12 years, Peter Pettigrew lived in the heart of the burrow. As Scabbers, Ron's hand-me-down pet, he was carried from room to room, Christmas to summer, joke to heartbreak. He watched Ginny whisper to her diary. He listened to Fred and George plot pranks in the dead of night. He sat on Percy's shoulder as he wrote letters and practiced speeches. He was there for every hug, every secret, every tear. Ron took him to Egypt. He took him to Hogwarts. He even brought him to the Triwizard Tournament. That means Peter, in rat form, was only feet away from Harry Potter dozens of times during conversations about Dumbledore, Sirius, and the Order of the Phoenix. He heard everything, and he remembered. It's chilling to think that in Goblet of Fire, while the champions stood in the arena, the Dark Lord's spy might have been curled up in Ron's pocket. Did he pass those secrets along? Did Voldemort know about Arthur Weasley's work with Muggle artifacts, about the family's deep loyalty to Dumbledore, about Harry's movements? Rowling never says. But the possibility lingers. The idea that a loyal, loving family was unknowingly harbouring the man who killed James and Lily makes every scene with Scabbers feel haunted. Pettigrew didn't need to break into the Ministry or interrogate auras. He had a front-row seat to one of the most important families in the fight against Voldemort, and he never had to cast a single spell to get there. He just sat, listened, and waited. Number 12, he could perform wandless magic. Peter Pettigrew was never called brilliant, not by teachers, not by friends, but somehow when it mattered most he performed magic that few could match. The night he faked his own death, he cast a massive explosive charm. 12 muggles died in an instant. His own finger was all that remained, and he did it with his wand hidden behind his back. No incantation, no dramatic gesture, just a burst of destruction. And then he was gone. It wasn't luck. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Lupin says, "He's a better wizard than you think." He was right. Peter's transformation into a rat, done in panic, under pressure, in the middle of a confrontation, was flawless. No wand, no pause, just instinct and escape. For 12 years he hadn't touched magic. Yet when the time came, he slipped back into his animagus form like it was second nature. That takes talent. Few wizards can perform wandless magic. Dumbledore could, Voldemort could, Snape perhaps, but Peter? It doesn't fit the image. That's what made him dangerous. He was invisible, underestimated, forgotten, and when people stop looking, that's when someone like Peter strikes. He used that talent not for honor, but for survival. It's the same spellbook he always followed. Don't fight, vanish, don't confront, destroy. He wasn't powerful in the way Sirius was or clever like Remus. But in the quiet corners of chaos, Peter could do what others couldn't. He escaped. Every time. Until the very end. Number 13. He was a key figure in the prophecy named Harry Potter as the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, but it never mentioned Peter Pettigrew. Still, without him, none of it would have happened. It was Peter who betrayed the Potters' hiding place. It was Peter who whispered their secret into Voldemort's ear. And it was that act, done in the dark, with shaking hands, that set everything in motion. Lily and James put their faith in the wrong person, Dumbledore says grimly in The Prisoner of Azkaban. That person was Peter. His choice didn't just lead to their deaths, it tore their world apart. Voldemort's killing curse, rebounding from baby Harry, shattered the Dark Lord's body and left him a wraith. The wizarding world woke to peace, and a boy with a lightning scar became legend. But the real trigger behind the prophecy's fulfillment wasn't a duel or a vision. It was one man's quiet decision to switch sides. If Peter hadn't defected, James and Lily would have lived. The Fidelius charm was flawless, unless the secret keeper betrayed them. And that's exactly what Peter did. Had Sirius remained the keeper, Voldemort may never have found them. The prophecy might have faded. No scar, no fame, no war. So when people remember the boy who lived, they rarely remember the coward who made it possible. But Peter was the hinge, a small, unnoticed figure who changed the course of history with a single act of fear. He didn't cast a killing curse. He didn't duel in the open. He only whispered, but that whisper echoed across generations. Number 14 shared a dormitory with Sirius Black. Peter Pettigrew slept just a few feet away from legends. In the Gryffindor boys' dormitory, he shared a room with James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin. Every night he listened to their laughter, their secrets, and their plans. They were bold, they were admired. And Peter? Peter followed. He trailed behind them like a shadow, always nodding, always agreeing, always eager to be included. Sirius called him Wormtail, but behind the nickname was mockery wrapped in camaraderie. Even in their group, he never quite belonged. James Potter was the golden boy, brilliant on a broomstick, fearless in the face of teachers, and confident enough to lead the room with a grin. Sirius was pure charm and defiance, the rebel who ran from his pure-blood family to live his own truth. Remus, though quiet, had a thoughtful wisdom that held the group together. But Peter? He copied their homework, laughed when they laughed. His magic was average, his presence forgettable. "He's not bad," Sirius once muttered in Order of the Phoenix, "just weak." That weakness would later become the spark for betrayal. There's no clearer sign of Peter's position than the Marauder's map. He helped create it, yet his name, Wormtail, meant little compared to Moony, Padfoot, and Prongs. While the others became animagi as impressive as a wolf, a stag, and a great black dog, Peter turned into a rat. Small, cowardly, insignificant, a symbol of how he saw himself and how others saw him too. His entire youth was spent trying to prove he mattered, not just to the world, but to them, to James, to Sirius, to Remus. Years later, in Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius growls, "He's been hiding like a rat for 12 years. The line cuts deeper than it seems. Peter had always been hiding, even when he was visible, even when he sat by the fire with the boys who changed the world. Inside, he believed the world would never see him as they saw James or Sirius. And so when the Dark Lord whispered promises of power and survival, Peter listened, because Peter had shared a room with heroes and never once felt like one of them. Number 15, not a villain with a capital V. Peter Pettigrew's story is one of quiet horror, not because he was powerful, cunning, or terrifying like Voldemort or Bellatrix Lestrange, but because he was ordinary. That is what makes him so uniquely repulsive. He represents the decay of loyalty, the cowardice that festers in the heart when fear outweighs friendship. He was never a villain in the grand sense of the word. He didn't crave destruction or chaos. He wasn't drawn to dark magic because it promised grandeur or meaning. He was simply a man who did not want to die, and in the magical world where death looms larger than life, that kind of fear can be deadly. In Gryffindor Tower, surrounded by the bold and brave, Peter had always been the weakest. He trailed behind James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin like a shadow, mimicking their confidence, but never possessing it. His animagus form, a rat, was not only symbolic, but brutally revealing. Scabbers was not a disguise so much as a revelation. Rats survive. They gnaw through the bones of ruined houses. They slip through cracks, live in filth, and escape through tunnels. They do not confront, they evade. Peter's betrayal was not born of ambition, it was born of fear. When he handed James and Lily Potter to Voldemort, he wasn't seeking power. He was trying to survive the rising tide of terror that swept through the wizarding world. He did not take pleasure in their deaths. There is no indication that Peter ever relished murder. He flinched at violence, and when he did kill, like when he destroyed Cedric Diggory's body, it was with trembling hands and muttered apologies. He did what he had to do because he could not face the alternative, death, loneliness, or the disapproval of stronger men. Even Voldemort recognized this. When he returned to corporeal form in the graveyard, Voldemort mocked Peter's weakness, but used him nonetheless. "You returned to me, not out of loyalty, but out of fear," he said, in the Goblet of Fire. And yet, Peter was rewarded with a silver hand, a cold, magical replacement for the one he severed in service to his master. This gift wasn't a gesture of honor. It was a leash. The hand was enchanted to strangle him the moment he hesitated in obeying Voldemort. The ultimate punishment for a coward is that even mercy is a trap. When Peter spared Harry's life in the dungeons of Malfoy Manor, it was not an act of heroism. It was a twitch of humanity, a flicker of old memory, a debt remembered. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry had spared him at the Shrieking Shack, insisting to Lupin and Sirius that my dad wouldn't have wanted his best friends to become killers. That single decision haunted Peter. Years later, when he found himself choking Harry in the cellar, his silver hand turned on him. Not because Peter turned traitor again, but because he hesitated. Because deep inside him, in the smallest crevice of his ruined soul, he remembered what mercy felt like. What makes Peter different from Bellatrix or Barty Crouch Jr. is that he was never cruel for pleasure. Bellatrix tortured the Longbottoms into insanity with wild eyes and laughter. Crouch killed with enthusiasm, deceived with joy, but Peter? He flinched, he begged, he squeaked like the rat he had become. Even his transformations lacked dignity. He didn't stride into darkness, he slithered. In The Order of the Phoenix, when Sirius Black talks about his brother Regulus, he shows more sadness than contempt. But when he speaks of Peter, his voice burns with disgust. He's not brave. He was always the weakest of us. He was always just there. That just there is a chilling phrase. Because Peter wasn't a mastermind. He was a bystander to evil who chose to align with it because it was easier than resisting it. That's why the other characters hate him. Not because he was powerful, but because he was pathetic. Peter's downfall began long before he gave in to Voldemort. It started in the common room at Hogwarts, where he laughed at Sirius's jokes and echoed James's arrogance without truly understanding it. He admired strength like a child admires a soldier, not out of love, but out of need. He needed protection, and when the strongest force in the world became Voldemort, he shifted like a weather vane in a storm, not out of belief, out of fear, always fear. There is a moment in The Half-Blood Prince when Dumbledore says, "It is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Peter's choices were never grand. They were small compromises that snowballed into catastrophe. He didn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy a family. He made little bargains, he whispered secrets, he stayed silent when he should have spoken, he ran when he should have stood. Peter's story is a warning, not of the villainy of ambition, but the danger of weakness. In war, people admire those who resist evil and those who fight it. They even understand those who believe in it with conviction. But cowards, those who facilitate evil while trembling behind it, earn no redemption. That is why Sirius, who spent 12 years in Azkaban for a crime Peter committed, had no words for him except fury. It wasn't just that Peter betrayed James, it was that he never looked back. Even Remus, the gentlest of the marauders, showed no mercy. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Peter pleads for his life, Remus's voice turns hard. "You should have realized, Peter," he says. "If Voldemort didn't kill you, we would." That's not the voice of vengeance. It's the voice of disillusionment, of betrayal so profound that even kindness is strangled by it. Number 16. Voldemort's silver hand was cursed. In the shadow-drenched graveyard at Little Hangleton, when Lord Voldemort rose once more to power, it was Peter Pettigrew who stood trembling, knife in hand, blood fresh on the blade. He had betrayed James and Lily Potter, had spent over a decade hiding in the form of a rat, and now, in the darkness of that cursed ground, he cut flesh to restore the Dark Lord's body. In return for this grotesque service, Voldemort did not offer mere thanks. Instead, with a slow, venomous grace, he conjured a silver hand out of thin air, cool, metallic, and unnaturally precise. It clasped Peter's mutilated stump as if it had always belonged to him. This hand, however, was not a gift. It was a shackle wrapped in splendor. The hand shimmered like moonlight over still water. It gleamed with a false purity, its surface reflecting nothing of the soul beneath. Voldemort called it a reward, but even in that moment, Pettigrew's eyes flickered with fear, as if he sensed the weight of this gift. This was no ordinary piece of magic. The Dark Lord had forged it with a curse deeper than mere enchantment. Its metal knew loyalty in a way flesh could not. It obeyed, not Peter's mind, but the will of its true master, Voldemort. Pettigrew, once known as Wormtail, wore the hand like a knight might wear a sword, but it was never a symbol of strength. It was a symbol of control. From that moment on, every movement of his right hand reminded him of who owned him. He could crush rocks with a flick of his wrist, but he could not scratch his own itch without remembering whose magic surged beneath the surface. This was Voldemort's message to all his servants: even your body is not your own. By the time we see Pettigrew again in the 5th book, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, he is nestled within the walls of the Malfoy Manor, slinking through the dungeons, performing silent tasks and serving without resistance. His silver hand glints faintly in the gloom. He is not a man, but an appendage of another's will. Every rustle of fabric, every cup he carries, every door he opens, he does so knowing he is watched even when alone. There is something grotesque about the way the hand behaves. Harry notices during their fleeting encounters that the fingers don't curl or rest naturally. They hover, tense, ever prepared to strike. It moves before Pettigrew does, sensing things, twitching without cause. Even the other Death Eaters avoid looking at it directly. It is a beautiful monstrosity, an artificial limb that whispers of punishment, not mercy. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione are captured and brought to Malfoy Manor, Pettigrew is assigned to watch them in the cellar. This is when the true nature of Voldemort's gift reveals itself. As Peter hesitates, just for a moment, when Harry reminds him that he once owed him a life debt, something ancient and human stirs in Pettigrew. His fingers tremble, not from rage, but from confusion. The boy who spared his life is now at his mercy, and for a heartbeat, the rat shows a flicker of the man. But mercy was a foreign language in Voldemort's court. The silver hand reacts, it senses the hesitation like a drop of blood in water. It begins to tighten, not around Harry, but around Peter's own throat. The hand strangles its master with mechanical precision, cold fingers press into soft flesh, and Pettigrew's eyes widen in horror. He claws at the metal, trying to pry it loose, but the hand does not yield. It has no soul, no conscience. It was created to obey one will, and Peter has disobeyed. The moment is devastating, not because Pettigrew dies, but because it is so clinical, so inevitable. There is no dramatic scream, no final monologue. Just the sickening sound of bone against metal, the slow crush of windpipe, the final gasp of a man destroyed by the very symbol of his allegiance. Voldemort didn't need to be present. His magic had already made the decision. Pettigrew's death was not a surprise. It was a consequence. This is a subtle yet chilling commentary on Voldemort's control over his followers. He never trusted anyone, not even those who sacrificed everything for him. Loyalty was not rewarded with kindness, it was rewarded with shackles. And if those shackles ever sensed rebellion, even in the form of mercy, they acted without hesitation. Pettigrew's hand was not just cursed, it was a spy, a sentinel, and an executioner. J.K. Rowling wrote this moment with the precision of a dagger. In the Deathly Hallows, the narration reads, his own silver fingers were moving inexorably toward his own throat. The metal hands were gradually constricting his windpipe. Pettigrew was turning blue and his eyes were bulging. The language is clinical, almost detached, which makes the horror even more pronounced. There is no emotional music here, no cinematic flourish, just the cold inevitability of magic twisted by cruelty. Voldemort's choice to use silver is not arbitrary. In folklore, silver is often associated with purity, with the supernatural, with the moon. It is a metal that repels evil, used to kill werewolves and purify curses. But here it becomes a vessel of corruption. It mocks the symbolism it once held. The irony is bitter. The metal of healing becomes the tool of murder. Voldemort, ever theatrical, turns symbols upside down. Peter Pettigrew is perhaps the most tragic character in the series, not because he was good and fell, but because he never had the strength to be either. He was always swayed by those stronger than him, and his death is the perfect mirror of his life, controlled, cowardly, and ultimately forgotten. Even in death, he is not remembered with respect or pity, only as a cautionary tale of what happens when you sell your soul too cheaply. Number 17, Pettigrew, believed he deserved praise. Peter Pettigrew never saw himself as a villain. In his own mind, he was a survivor. He believed that the world had wronged him, that his talents had gone unnoticed, and that the people around him, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, had taken everything for granted. They had basked in glory, had been hailed as heroes, while he had lingered in the background, the afterthought in every memory, the tag-along no one took seriously. Even in their school days, Peter had been the least impressive of the marauders. Sirius was dashing and reckless, James was confident and admired, Remus was wise and introspective. Peter was the shadow. And yet, in the twisted recesses of his mind, he believed he had played an equal part in their adventures. He saw himself as deserving of the same praise, the same accolades. When the world refused to give him what he thought he'd earned, he turned to the only place where he imagined he might finally receive his due, Voldemort. When Peter betrayed James and Lily Potter, he did not perceive it as an act of treachery. He believed he was choosing the winning side, aligning himself with a future where he would finally be recognized. In that infamous moment when he gave away their location, sealing their fate, and marking Harry with the scar that would define him, Peter did not tremble with guilt. He expected reward. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when his identity is revealed at last, Lupin's words echo the truth the others had always seen. You sold James and Lily to Voldemort, that's why he's dead. But Peter never truly accepted that as a condemnation. In his mind, he had made a reasonable exchange, loyalty for survival, secrets for safety, and more than that, he expected to be celebrated for it. After Voldemort's fall, Peter lived as a rat, literally hiding in plain sight as Ron Weasley's pet Scabbers. Even then, he saw himself as a man who had done what was necessary. When he faked his own death and framed Sirius Black, leaving behind a severed finger to sell the lie, Peter did so not with remorse, but with the belief that he had outwitted everyone. His entire life became a self-declared victory over injustice. Every act of cowardice, every deception was, according to Peter, a justified step toward claiming what he was owed, when Voldemort returned in the Goblet of Fire. Peter played a pivotal role in his resurrection. He provided blood, flesh, and loyalty. And still what he sought most wasn't forgiveness or redemption, it was recognition. He was certain the Dark Lord would reward him. After all, he had been the only one to search for Voldemort after his fall. He had been the one to care for the wretched, serpent-like creature in the Albanian forest. He had endured the years of indignity, crawling on all fours in rodent form, always watching, always listening. When Voldemort said, "Wormtail here has been the most faithful of my followers," Peter's heart soared. But that moment of apparent praise came with a price. His new hand, crafted from silver, glistened like a gift, but it was also a collar. Voldemort's words were not of admiration, but of calculation. Peter, in his blind hunger for approval, failed to see that he was merely a tool. The other Death Eaters never embraced him. Bellatrix Lestrange, for one, looked at him with thinly veiled contempt. Lucius Malfoy barely acknowledged his presence. Even the lowlier ranks laughed behind his back. He was not a brother in arms, not a hero of the cause. He was the rat, the coward, who had only ever done what was safest. Peter, in turn, could not understand why his sacrifices were not enough. Why his loyalty went unrewarded. He had cut off his own hand for Voldemort. He had brought him back from near death. But in the eyes of his fellow Death Eaters, he was not brave. He was pathetic. Peter expected gratitude. He had imagined himself sitting at the right hand of the Dark Lord, an advisor, a commander, perhaps even a trusted lieutenant. What he received instead was disdain and orders. He was not respected, only tolerated. In the Deathly Hallows, when Harry and his friends are imprisoned in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, Peter is the one sent to guard them. It is a moment that lays bare the truth of his standing. He is not a warrior or a leader. He is a jailer, a lackey, and even then he clings to the hope that someone will thank him. When he enters the cellar, wand drawn, it is not menace that drives him, it is desperation. But the one person he did not expect to face is Harry Potter, the boy he marked by proxy, the child who survived his betrayal. Harry appeals to what little is left of Peter's conscience, saying, "You're going to kill me after I saved your life?" And in that pause, in that brief flicker of doubt, Peter's hand, Voldemort's gift, turns on him. The silver fingers tighten around his throat, and Peter Pettigrew dies not as a martyr, not as a servant, but as a man who never understood why the world hated him. The tragedy of Peter Pettigrew lies not in his actions, but in his perception of them. He saw himself as a victim, a friend overlooked, a talent unrecognized, a loyal follower unthanked. Even after all the blood he spilled, he clung to the fantasy that he had done the right thing, that he had been brave enough to choose the stronger side. When he spoke of the Potters, he never used words of remorse. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Snape mentions Peter in a tone of disgust, Voldemort's silence is telling. There is no defense of Wormtail, no gesture of respect. He is a shadow in the corner, always listening, always hoping. Peter had mistaken proximity for significance. He believed that being near power meant sharing in it. But Voldemort had no friends, only tools. Bellatrix was a fanatic. Barty Crouch Jr. was a fanatic. Peter was something worse, an opportunist. He shifted loyalties, not for ideology, but for survival. And in a world where every action carries consequence, that cowardice was his greatest crime. The wizarding world reviled him, not because he was cruel, but because he was weak in the worst way. He lacked courage, yes, but more damningly, he lacked understanding. Number 18, his death went unnoticed. Pettigrew died the way he lived, shrouded in shadows, unnoticed by those around him, and discarded by the very people he once betrayed to gain favor. His final moment arrived in the damp cellar of Malfoy Manor, where his life ended, not with a shout, but with a gasp. There was no grandeur in his death, no noble sacrifice, no redemption. What makes this death even more haunting is the way it quietly slipped through the cracks of the larger narrative, barely acknowledged by the characters who once knew him. Not even a sentence in the aftermath of the Battle of Hogwarts referenced the man who betrayed James and Lily Potter, the coward who lingered on the fringes of every major event, only to vanish in silence. Peter's end comes in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows during Harry, Ron, and Hermione's imprisonment in Malfoy Manor. Ron and Harry, having escaped their cellar, are caught by Pettigrew as they attempt to save Hermione. In that moment, Peter raises his wand, and for a breath of time, it seems the coward will carry out Voldemort's bidding once again. But Harry, with piercing words, reminds him of a life debt. Years before, in the Shrieking Shack, Harry had spared Pettigrew's life despite his betrayal. "You're going to kill me," Harry says, "after I saved your life. You owe me, Wormtail." The magic that binds the wizarding world more than spells, the ancient, unbreakable bond of life debt, intervenes. Peter hesitates. That hesitation, however, does not redeem him. It is not an act of bravery, nor an apology. He does not speak a word. There is no plea, no explanation, no moment of growth. His own magical hand, gifted by Voldemort after his return, turns against him. It tightens, strangles, and ends him. As J.K. Rowling writes, the silver hand seemed to tighten momentarily. Peter gave a strangled cry. His eyes widened with terror, and he dropped to the floor. That's it. No mourning, no mention of his body. Harry and Ron simply take his wand and leave. This scene, stark in its brevity, serves as a mirror to Peter's character throughout the series. He was never the bold one. Even in his youth as part of the Marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and himself, he followed, mimicked, and obeyed. They nicknamed him Wormtail, and even the name reflects his status. He never led, he never stood alone. He always sought the strongest back to hide behind. First it was James, then Voldemort. Peter's death, self-inflicted through Voldemort's enchanted hand, was not an act of heroism or vengeance. It was punishment for weakness. Magic recognizes betrayal in its own way. Perhaps what is most unsettling is how completely Peter's death is ignored by the characters who once called him friend. Sirius is already dead, James long gone, and Lupin never mentions Peter again. Even Harry, who once spared him, barely reflects on the life that was just extinguished in front of him. There is no time for grief, but there is also no memory. No one stops to say, "That was Peter, he used to be one of us." In a book that pauses to honor Dobby, Fred, and even Snape, Peter is absent from all lists of the dead, all eulogies. He simply vanishes. Peter's life is a tragic thread woven through the grander tapestry of war. Unlike Voldemort, who chose power with conviction, or Snape, who chose redemption with anguish, Peter never truly chose. His decisions were reactions motivated by fear, not ideology. When he betrayed James and Lily to Voldemort, it wasn't for belief in the cause, but because he feared Voldemort more. He didn't crave glory, he craved safety. His animagus form, a rat, is no accident. It is a symbol of his essence, survival above all. Yet there is an irony in that. For all his scrambling and treachery, Peter dies a death that ensures he will be remembered by no one. Unlike Snape, who was redeemed in death, or Bellatrix, who died as a feared and infamous lieutenant, Peter's memory evaporates. The wizarding world does not recall him. There are no statues, no curses, no legends. His life was one of constant betrayal to friends, to enemies, and finally to himself. In betraying Voldemort even momentarily, he triggered his own demise, caught in the web of magical justice. The absence of mourning is not just a narrative oversight, it is a literary judgment. Peter dies a death that is not given the honor of reflection because he lived a life that refused accountability. His cowardice was not in a single act, but in a pattern. He lived among heroes, but chose the path of least resistance every time. In the end, the world moved on without him. That might be the deepest cut of all, not to be hated, but to be irrelevant. Rowling uses Peter's demise to show that not all characters earn closure. Some fade without dignity. The story does not redeem him because Peter never truly seeks redemption. When he helps resurrect Voldemort in the graveyard in Goblet of Fire, he does it with trembling hands and whispers. His only request is to be spared, to be given a hand to replace what he sacrificed. Voldemort complies, but the hand comes with a curse. When Peter finally shows doubt, finally hesitates, it becomes his end. The silver hand, cold and inhuman, enforces Voldemort's will. It crushes mercy. In doing so, it erases Peter. Even Dobby the house elf is remembered more vividly. His death inspires Harry. His grave is marked. Peter, meanwhile, is never spoken of again. In the broader war, he is a footnote, for a man who betrayed the Potters, caused the deaths of Lily and James, and framed Sirius Black. He receives almost no narrative consequence. There is no trial, no condemnation. There is only silence. and perhaps that is what Peter feared most. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when he is unmasked in the Shrieking Shack, he grovels before Sirius and Lupin, pleading for his life. What was there to be gained by fighting the most evil wizard who has ever existed, he cries. It is a window into his mind. He does not understand the values that govern friendship, loyalty, or sacrifice. He lives in a world where survival is the only metric. He cannot fathom dying for someone else. That is why he dies alone. That is why no one remembers. The irony is that Peter had the chance to be remembered differently. If he had sacrificed himself for Harry, if he had used his hesitation to aid them instead of merely freezing, he might have been forgiven. Rowling does not deny redemption to those who seek it. Snape, Regulus Black, even Draco Malfoy are all allowed moments of complexity. But Peter never steps forward, he only stops. That's not courage, that's paralysis. His own friends treated him like a mascot. Sirius once remarked, if you made a better rat than a human, it's not much to boast about, Peter. That insult, said in anger, captures the truth. Peter was never seen as an equal among the marauders. He was tolerated, he was included out of kindness, and when he betrayed them, he confirmed their worst suspicions. Even his death confirms it. He wasn't strong enough to be evil. He wasn't strong enough to be good. He was merely there. There's something particularly chilling in the idea that you can live through great events, stand next to giants, and still vanish without a trace. Peter stood beside Voldemort during the resurrection ritual. He served as his caretaker, his loyal servant. He lived in hiding for over a decade, disguised as a pet in the Weasley home. He influenced events large and small, and yet, when the dust settles, the world forgets him. The books do not speak of his burial or even of his body. In a series where even secondary characters are given arcs of growth or downfall, Colin Creevey, Lavender Brown, Gellert, Grindelwald, Peter is the one who simply fades. Not because he didn't matter, but because he chose to matter in all the wrong ways. He was not brave enough to be remembered. His betrayal was not rooted in conviction. It was born from fear, and so history has no use for him. What remains of Peter is a warning. Not every traitor dies with fire and fury. Some die quietly in cellars at the hands of their own choices. Magic, in Rowling's world, does not forget, even when people do. The enchanted hand did what no human could, Judge Peter, honestly. In death, it offered him exactly what he had earned, no more, no less. It is almost poetic that his wand, taken by Ron, becomes more useful in that instant than Peter had ever been in life. Ron uses it to fight, to save, to escape. The object continues while its owner is discarded. Peter, the man, becomes less important than the tool he left behind, a silent metaphor for his entire existence, always secondary, always replaceable. The tragedy of Peter Pettigrew is not just in his cowardice, but in his wasted potential. He was sorted into Gryffindor. Somewhere deep within him there was supposed to be courage, but fear won every time. Even when he had a chance to fight back, to stand tall, he could only hesitate. And in that brief hesitation he met his end, not with honor, but with quiet betrayal. So when the final tally of the war is made, when statues are raised and names are etched into memory, Peter Pettigrew is absent. Not because people chose to forget him, but because he chose to never be truly seen. That is the final verdict. That is the punishment. Not the silver hand, not the strangled breath, but the silence that followed. Number 19, he was at Hogwarts. When Harry arrived, Peter Pettigrew was in Hogwarts when Harry arrived. That fact alone, when viewed with all the surrounding details, feels like a shiver running down the spine of the reader. While students laughed in the Great Hall, while Dumbledore stood tall at the head table giving his welcoming speeches, while Harry, Ron, and Hermione battled trolls and solved riddles, Peter Pettigrew, an active death. Eater was tucked safely in Ron's pocket as Scabbers the rat. He wasn't hiding in the Forbidden Forest, nor lurking beyond the gates of the castle. He was there, in the dormitories of Gryffindor Tower, mere feet away from the boy who lived. Scabbers was more than a pet. He was a silent observer, carried from the Burrow to platform 934, from the Hogwarts Express into the very core of the castle itself. Harry first met him on the train, curled up in Ron's lap, twitching in his sleep. "What's that?" Harry asked. "A rat?" Ron replied with little pride. "His name's Scabbers, and he's pathetic, isn't he?" What Harry didn't know was that he was already in the presence of the man who had betrayed his parents to Voldemort. Peter was a coward, that much is clear. But cowardice didn't dull his cunning. He had managed to fake his death, frame Sirius Black, and live undetected for 12 years. And then he went one step further. He re-entered the world of magic through a back door no one thought to check, as the hand-me-down pet of a Weasley boy. He didn't just observe Hogwarts, he inhabited it. For 3 years, he lived beneath its enchanted ceilings, sitting unnoticed at the breakfast table as owls swooped in with letters. He was present when McGonagall turned desks into pigs. He likely heard every word of Gilderoy Lockhart's nonsensical lectures. The thought is dizzying. For 3 full years, a Death Eater attended every Gryffindor class without anyone noticing. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, the text reads, "Scabbers was curled up in Ron's pocket, fast asleep." He was there when they learned to duel, when they explored the secrets of the castle, when Harry encountered the mirror of Erasure. Pettigrew, trapped in rat form, was like a ghost in a place where he did not belong, but not a harmless one. He was a predator in hibernation. Perhaps most chilling of all is that Peter witnessed the very foundation of Harry's formative years. He saw Harry form his first friendships, discover his identity, and face Voldemort in the underground chambers beneath the school. And yet he did nothing. That silence speaks volumes. Was he afraid Voldemort might not return? Or was he waiting for the right moment to strike? In the Goblet of Fire, Voldemort himself acknowledges Peter's choice to stay hidden. Wormtail here has paid some debts. I do not forgive easily. Even his master understood that Peter had remained in the shadows, too cautious to act. Hogwarts was considered the safest place in the wizarding world. But all along, one of its inhabitants was the man responsible for the worst betrayal in recent magical history. It wasn't just that he had betrayed James and Lily Potter. He had watched their son sleep peacefully in a bed a few feet away from his own nest in the Gryffindor dormitory. Peter could have attacked. He could have delivered Harry to Voldemort, but he didn't. Was it loyalty? No, it was survival. Peter Pettigrew didn't act unless he had no other choice. When Fred and George gave Ron an old rat, they thought nothing of it. But imagine what it meant for Peter. After 12 years of hiding as a rat with the Weasleys, he was suddenly brought back to Hogwarts, the very school he had graduated from decades earlier. Every hallway would have been familiar, every staircase would have carried memories, but now he was unseen, forced to scurry in shadows. He passed portraits of old headmasters who might once have known his name, and he stayed silent. The invisibility of Peter's presence is what makes it so haunting. He wasn't just hiding in the shrieking shack or buried beneath the dungeons. He was sitting in the boys' dormitory as Harry opened birthday presents, as Neville misplaced his toad, as Seamus exploded his cauldron. When Dumbledore walked the halls at night, there was a Death Eater under the same roof, and no one knew. The Marauder's map is perhaps the most telling artifact of this entire charade. When Fred and George gave it to Harry in his 3rd year, they had no idea. It contained a clue to one of the greatest deceptions in Hogwarts history. You might have noticed there are 7 secret passages out of the castle, they said with grins. But it wasn't the passages that mattered, it was the names. When Harry later Watched the map, he saw a dot labelled Peter Pettigrew walking beside Ron Weasley, and he stared in disbelief. Peter was supposed to be dead. That moment when Peter's name appears isn't just a twist in a plot. It is a revelation of years of lies. The castle that had seemed so safe had been a sanctuary for the enemy. Harry had unknowingly eaten meals next to the man who sent his parents to their deaths. Hermione, so sharp and clever, had likely petted him on the head. Even Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, never suspected that one of Voldemort's own was slinking through the halls in the form of a rodent. Scabbers was there when Fawkes the Phoenix burst into flames. He was there when Lockhart lost his memory. He likely watched Crookshanks try to sniff him out and stayed absolutely still. He was there when Buckbeak was sentenced to die. In fact, Scabbers played a direct role in that. Hagrid tells Harry and Ron that Scabbers had been eaten, and the boys are devastated. They blame Hermione and her cat. The friendship is strained, but Peter was merely hiding again, using the conflict to mask his escape. He played them all as he always did. The irony is bitter. While Sirius Black was rotting in Azkaban for a crime he never committed, Peter Pettigrew sat in the sunshine, watching Quidditch matches, safely hidden on the lap of a teenage boy. Sirius, who had tried to protect James and Lily, Sirius, who had been loyal, he was hunted like a madman, while the true traitor dozed in the Gryffindor common room. The tragedy of it all is almost too much to bear. When Harry finally confronts the truth in the Shrieking Shack, the layers peel back like old wallpaper. "You sold them to Voldemort," he says, trembling with fury. "You killed them." Peter begs for mercy, but the damage is done. He cannot unlive the years he spent hiding in plain sight, pretending to be harmless. He cannot erase the fact that when given the chance to stand for good, he chose instead to disappear. There's a reason Sirius growls, "You should have died rather than betray your friends." That line isn't metaphorical. In the world of magic, loyalty is everything. Peter abandoned it, and then he spent 3 years basking in the warmth of Hogwarts, a place that should have cast him out with fury. His presence was an insult to everything the castle stood for. One might wonder what Peter felt during those years. Did he feel guilt as he watched Harry walk past? Did he hear the whispers of students discussing Voldemort's fall, knowing the truth? Did he flinch when someone mentioned James Potter's bravery? The books never tell us, but we can imagine. Peter, curled in his cage, trying to sleep, must have heard Ron whisper stories about Harry's exploits. He must have known his past was catching up. His inaction speaks louder than any confession. Peter Pettigrew was the embodiment of self-preservation. He waited, watched, calculated, and when the time came, he ran to Voldemort once more, but for 3 whole years he had a front-row seat to the rebirth of hope in the magical world, and he did nothing. That silence is more damning than any spell. The idea that a Death Eater lived in Gryffindor Tower without anyone knowing challenges the way we see safety in the wizarding world. It reminds us that evil can wear innocent faces, that betrayal doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it hides in pockets and sleeps in shoeboxes. Peter wasn't just a coward, he was a ghost of war that haunted Hogwarts while pretending to be dead. Even Dumbledore, with all his magical awareness, never suspected that the boy who had once been a marauder was now a rat sleeping in a Gryffindor dormitory. It is perhaps one of the few blind spots the headmaster ever had. And it makes us wonder how many other secrets lay hidden behind the laughter and lantern light of Hogwarts. It is this very contradiction of a traitor living among heroes, of evil curling up at the feet of innocence, that makes Peter Pettigrew's story one of the darkest veins in the tapestry of the Harry Potter saga. His presence in Hogwarts was a crack in the illusion, a reminder that history's villains aren't always locked away. Sometimes they're watching, sometimes they're waiting, sometimes they're right there. Number 20. He never truly regretted his actions. Peter Pettigrew's betrayal had already left scars that could not be healed. When Sirius Black stood before him in the Shrieking Shack, with Harry, Ron, Hermione and Remus Lupin surrounding him, the truth was not just revealed. It was laid bare, stripped of every layer of illusion. Yet even then, even with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, Peter did not apologize. He did not show regret. He showed only fear. He trembled and cried, but his tears were not those of a man who regretted the lives he had destroyed. They were the tears of a man caught, exposed, desperate to survive another moment. That night, more than any other, made one thing achingly clear. Peter Pettigrew never truly repented. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, as the truth began to unravel in the shadows of the Shrieking Shack, we saw Peter cornered, literally and morally. When Sirius accused him of betraying James and Lily Potter to Voldemort, Peter didn't deny it with conviction. Instead, he whimpered, deflected, and begged. His words painted himself as a man with no choice, a victim of circumstances rather than the architect of disaster. But not once did he say he was sorry, not once did he admit that what he did was wrong. His defense was not built on guilt, but on helplessness. What was there to be gained by refusing him? He cried, justifying his betrayal. The question wasn't rhetorical, and it was sincere. He believed it. That was who he truly was. He wasn't weeping for James or Lily. He wasn't mourning Cedric Diggory, Bertha Jorkins, or the many nameless lives lost in Voldemort's shadow. He was weeping for himself. The selfishness of his actions echoed in every syllable he spoke. His pleading with Sirius and Remus was not driven by remorse, but by instinct. The instinct to survive at all costs. When Harry ultimately stopped Sirius and Lupin from killing Pettigrew, it was not because Peter had earned mercy. It was because Harry, who had known death too intimately, refused to let it define him. He extended mercy to a man who had shown none, but it was not rewarded. Even when spared, Peter didn't express gratitude in a way that suggested any real self-reflection. His grovelling was empty of growth. He latched onto life like a parasite, returning to Voldemort the moment he was able, clutching loyalty to power rather than to principle. He had been gifted a second chance, not by fate, but by Harry's conscious choice, and he squandered it. Years later, in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, we saw Pettigrew again, this time in a far darker setting, the graveyard in Little Hangleton. He didn't hesitate to maim Harry. He didn't pause before killing Cedric. He didn't question the morality of resurrecting the Dark Lord. His hands trembled as he cut his own flesh, offering it to the cauldron, but he did not resist. His voice didn't crack with guilt. His heart didn't waver. He acted because he believed Voldemort would protect him. He wasn't driven by fear of death anymore, but by the allure of safety through submission. Pettigrew had learned nothing. In fact, his entire life was an arc of avoidance, not just avoidance of death, but avoidance of responsibility. He scuttled through the shadows like the rat he had become, always watching, always calculating. He had spent 12 years hiding as Scabbers, feigning the harmlessness of a pet, all while the wizarding world believed him dead, a martyr to Voldemort's wrath. This deceit wasn't passive, it was his chosen refuge. He let Sirius rot in Azkaban for a crime he himself committed. He watched the torment of Remus Lupin, watched Harry grow up orphaned and unloved, and said nothing. He was content in his silence because it kept him safe. When you look closely at Peter's life, you realize that regret never entered his vocabulary. His choices were not tormented ones. They were expedient. He aligned himself with Voldemort not because he shared the ideology, but because he lacked the courage to oppose it. He betrayed the Potters because it was the easier path. "He would have killed me," he cried, when confronted, revealing more about his priorities than he intended. In Pettigrew's mind, survival was virtue, loyalty was negotiable, love was expendable. Even in his final moments, Peter was a man in denial. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, and when he encounters Harry again in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, the hand Voldemort had gifted him tightens around his throat, a punishment not for repentance but for the weakness of mercy. It's telling that this moment when he hesitates in killing Harry is not born of a moral epiphany, but rather a flicker of personal debt. A hand spared, years earlier, twitches against the instinct to destroy, and Voldemort's enchantment sees this as betrayal. Yet even then, Peter does not ask forgiveness. He dies without confession, without change, without peace. It is this refusal to change that makes Peter Pettigrew so disturbing. Most villains in the Harry Potter universe possess some complexity, some shade of humanity. Even Tom Riddle had a background that explained, if not excused, his monstrosity. Severus Snape was haunted by his mistakes and sought redemption through painful service. Even Draco Malfoy showed growth, but Peter was static. He never questioned, he never grew, he never looked back and felt the weight of his actions crush him. He simply moved forward from betrayal to betrayal, chasing the nearest shadow under which he could hide. His supposed weakness, the trait he often cited as justification, was not a flaw but a shield. He wrapped himself in it like armor. He used it to excuse the inexcusable. But weakness does not absolve. Weakness can cry out, can falter, can plead for help. But it cannot destroy families and then demand sympathy. Pettigrew wasn't weak in the way Neville Longbottom once was. Shy, uncertain, yet ultimately brave. He was weak in the way that corrodes the soul, self-preserving, cowardly, and blind to the suffering of others. Sirius once described him as the kind of person who always went looking for the strongest, who'd be good to him. This line is one of the clearest insights into Pettigrew's psyche. He aligned himself with James Potter during school not out of friendship, but out of convenience. He admired strength, attached himself to it like ivy to a wall, and withdrew when that wall crumbled. When Voldemort rose, Pettigrew saw opportunity, not conflict. He didn't weigh morality, he weighed odds. What's chilling is how ordinary his evil was. He was not a dark lord or a twisted genius. He was the friend who sat beside you, laughed with you, and quietly sold your name to death. He was the kind of villain who thrived in shadows, not because he loved darkness, but because light required courage. He didn't need power, he needed protection. That's what made him dangerous. In contrast, Harry's act of mercy remains one of the most morally complex moments in the entire series. Harry's choice not to kill Peter was rooted in the belief that even the most lost soul might someday find redemption. Dumbledore would have approved. It was the ultimate expression of resistance, not to Peter, but to the cycle of violence. Yet the tragedy lies in the fact that Harry's mercy was wasted. Peter did not grow into it. He shrank beneath it. What would have happened if Peter had changed, if he had truly repented, sought forgiveness, offered himself in service of atonement? The wizarding world might have seen in him a cautionary tale with a hopeful ending. But Peter made his choice, over and over, not once, not in Azkaban, not in Little Hangleton, not in Malfoy Manor. His silence in the face of truth was louder than any confession. Perhaps the saddest truth of all is that Peter Pettigrew is not a character you love to hate. He's a character you forget to hate because his evil is so small, so mundane, so pathetic that it almost slips beneath your notice. But the damage he did was not small. It was seismic. It shattered lives, shaped destinies, and contributed to the return of Voldemort. All without once uttering the words, "I'm sorry." In the end, Peter didn't die as a man betrayed by both sides. He died exactly as he had lived, clinging to the wrong one. The silver hand that choked him was a gift, not just enchanted, but cursed. It served a master who rewarded only loyalty without conscience, obedience without hesitation. In hesitating, Peter revealed the final crack in his mask, but the man behind the mask had nothing to offer. No final words of truth, no moment of clarity, just fear, once again, consuming him. Remus Lupin, who had once called Peter a friend, did not mourn him. Sirius Black, who had spent over a decade imprisoned because of Peter's lies, did not pity him. Even Harry, who had saved his life, never looked back on that choice with warmth. When he reminded Peter of the debt he owed, it wasn't to inspire change, it was to hold a mirror to the man who had never looked into one. Pettigrew's story stands as a quiet warning in the world of Harry Potter. Not all monsters are powerful, some are pitiful, not all betrayals are grand, some are whispered, and not all villains seek redemption. Some run from it until they can run no more, and Peter never stopped running. Number 21 secretly spied on the Weasleys. Peter Pettigrew's legacy is a dark and winding trail of betrayal, cowardice, and cunning survival. Yet among the many truths and half-truths that surround his story, one unsettling detail remains disturbingly overlooked. For 12 years he lived undetected within the Weasley household, disguised as the family's pet rat, Scabbers. Far from being a harmless rodent, he was a spy, always watching, always listening. His small, unassuming body moved through bedrooms, kitchens, and common rooms, soaking up information with every flick of his tail. Few ever stopped to think what that rat might have heard or what he might have done with that knowledge. Consider the sheer scope of what Peter could access. From the moment Percy brought him into the family, Scabbers was given the privileges of a household member. He slept in rooms where confidential discussions occurred and was carried on family trips, including visits to Diagon Alley and even to Hogwarts. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Scabbers was in Ron's pocket during the train ride, during meals, and even in the Gryffindor dormitory. Pettigrew was never truly gone. He was only hidden. And he had chosen the Weasleys, one of the most connected families in the wizarding world, not by accident, but by calculation. By the time Harry met Scabbers in his first year, Pettigrew had already spent nearly a decade gathering details about the Weasleys. This wasn't a matter of convenience, it was strategic. Arthur Weasley worked for the Ministry of Magic. Bill, the eldest son, was stationed with Gringotts in Egypt. Charlie was working with dragons in Romania, a field of great interest to the dark arts due to the magical properties of dragon parts. Percy was climbing the ranks of school authority, and the twins, Fred and George, had a knack for uncovering secrets and manipulating magical devices. And then there was Ron, Harry's best friend and roommate. Through him, Peter Pettigrew had a front-row seat to the movements and thoughts of the boy who lived. In Goblet of Fire, Voldemort's return is marked by a series of meticulously timed events. But months before the resurrection ritual in the Little Hangleton graveyard, Pettigrew had already rejoined his master. It is entirely plausible that even before this reunion, he was supplying information, quietly, subtly, in ways no one thought to question. There is a theory grounded in a haunting plausibility that Peter had been funneling details to Voldemort's supporters through coded messages or visits disguised as Scabbers leaving the house. Rats, after all, are experts at slipping through cracks unnoticed. What information could he have given? Plenty. For instance, in Order of the Phoenix, when Harry is attacked by Dementors in Little Whinging, the Ministry is shocked. Dementors don't wander far from Azkaban without orders, and certainly not into Muggle suburbs. Dolores Umbridge later claims she sent them, but why choose that specific time and place? One theory suggests Voldemort knew Harry would be there, alone, vulnerable. Who else could have provided that intel if not Pettigrew, who had lived long enough in the Weasley household to learn about the Dursleys and their connection to Harry? Harry had never written about the Dursleys in any public way. Their location, their habits, even the fact that he returned there every summer, those were not common knowledge. But Ron knew. The Weasley family knew. They'd visited Privet Drive, they'd heard Harry talk about it. And Scabbers had been around for years before that visit in Chamber of Secrets. A rat in a corner could have easily memorized an address, a routine, a list of summer plans. This was not a coincidence. It was exposure. J.K. Rowling writes in Prisoner of Azkaban, "He's been in my family for 12 years. That's why Sirius Black thinks he belongs to me." But Pettigrew's motivations extended far beyond hiding. His very survival depended on relevance, on making himself valuable to Voldemort again. What better way than by tracking the movements of the most powerful boy in the wizarding world and his allies? Let us not forget the events leading up to the Triwizard Tournament. Pettigrew had already helped Voldemort return to a semblance of life by then, but for Barty Crouch Jr. to impersonate Mad-Eye Moody, and for the plan to unfold so perfectly, getting Harry into the tournament, manipulating the maze, ensuring the portkey, it required coordination. It required insight into Hogwarts routines, security, and even friendships. Could some of that information have originated with Pettigrew, who once shared a dormitory with James Potter, knew how Gryffindor Tower operated, and had spent years in the same room with Harry and Ron? Consider what Ron said in Chamber of Secrets about Scabbers. "He's just lazy, all he ever does is sleep and eat." But what if that was just a mask? What if Peter had learned that silence and stillness made him invisible? It's no coincidence that Crookshanks, Hermione's half-Kneazle, was the only one to suspect Scabbers' true nature. Kneazles are known for their ability to sense untrustworthy individuals. Crookshanks didn't try to eat Scabbers, he tried to expose him. Pettigrew's knowledge of the Burrow, its enchantments, and Arthur's position at the Ministry could have been incredibly valuable. When the Order of the Phoenix began using the Burrow as a safe house, they may have unknowingly been protecting a compromised location. And the tragic attack during Bill and Fleur's wedding in Deathly Hallows, could that have been made easier by details Pettigrew had once passed on? Some fans point to a line in Deathly Hallows when Lupin explains, "They knew Voldemort was moving again. They had spies everywhere." What he doesn't say, but what we can infer, is that some of those spies were once thought harmless. Peter had perfected the art of passing beneath notice. It was a skill he had honed as a coward, sharpened as a rat, and weaponized as a spy. The tragedy here is layered. The Weasleys, a family that embodied warmth, trust, and loyalty, unknowingly hosted a traitor in their home. He knew their fears, their dreams, and their children's secrets. He likely knew about Ron's insecurities, Percy's ambition, and Fred and George's plans to drop out and start a joke shop. To a strategist like Voldemort, even such small details had potential uses. Harry's nightmares about Voldemort, his scar burning at strange times, the visions he experienced, could they have been manipulated or predicted based on information Voldemort received from Pettigrew? The attack on the Department of Mysteries was not spontaneous. It required timing, knowledge of Harry's relationships, and manipulation of Sirius Black's name. These were all areas where Pettigrew's long observation of Ron and, by extension, Harry, would have come in useful. The full extent of Peter's betrayal may never be known, but his presence in the Weasley household represents a long con of breathtaking patience. He waited through seasons and years, absorbing the lives around him. He wasn't idle, he was calculating. Every bedtime story he heard, every whispered conversation, every mention of Harry's location or Hogwarts' security measures, these were not idle scraps to him, they were ammunition. It's haunting to realize that Voldemort's rise may have been aided not just by powerful magic or fierce followers, but by a man who played dead in a child's pocket, by a rat who knew how to listen, by a coward who understood that knowledge is more powerful than any wand. "I was your rat," Peter shrieks in Prisoner of Azkaban, but he was never just a rat. He was a shadow in plain sight. This raises troubling questions about magical ethics and surveillance in the wizarding world. How many other animagi might be hiding in homes disguised as pets or wild animals? How many other secrets are unknowingly exposed by the intimacy of magical creatures? Peter was registered nowhere. His deception went undetected for more than a decade, if not for Sirius Black's escape and Crookshanks's. Intuition, who knows how much longer he would have remained embedded. Peter Pettigrew's role as Scabbers casts a long, eerie shadow over the entire timeline of the Harry Potter series. The cheerful chaos of the Burrow may have shielded him, but it also fed him. The Weasleys became unwitting pawns in a game they never volunteered for, and through them, through Ron, Harry himself became exposed. In the end, when Peter meets his demise in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, it's poetic justice that the hand given to him by Voldemort, the very symbol of his loyalty to darkness, turns on him. But even in death, his secrets remain buried. What conversations did he report? What locations did he compromise? The books leave it unsaid, but the theory that he contributed to the Dementor attack on Harry is not without weight. After all, Peter Pettigrew was never just hiding. He was gathering. And what he gathered, he gave. The rat in Ron's pocket wasn't a relic of childhood. He was a listening device. A traitor. A man who sold out his friends once, and likely did it again, silently, from the shadows of the Burrow. Number 22, his name still appeared on the Marauders' map. Peter Pettigrew's name had no business appearing at Hogwarts. That was the unspoken truth, hidden within the folds of a magical parchment, more honest than most wizards would ever be. The Marauders' map, a product of mischief and ingenuity, bore the names of every soul who roamed the castle's corridors, living or otherwise. It had revealed the movements of animagi, deceived dark wizards, and even betrayed the hidden passages buried deep in Hogwarts' bones. It was no ordinary map, and yet, for all its reliability, Harry Potter ignored one of its most curious revelations: a dead man walking through the school day after day. In Harry's third year, while he was exploring the secrets of the Marauders' map, he noticed a name that he did not understand. The parchment displayed Peter Pettigrew wandering the halls. It should have chilled him. Instead, it puzzled him, and no more significant than a misplaced book in the library. He assumed the map was flawed, perhaps confusing names, perhaps malfunctioning. But that assumption, that subtle underestimation of the map's magic, served J.K. Rowling's grand deception well. The truth had always been right in front of him, spelled out in crisp, tiny letters. The brilliance of this narrative twist lies not only in its later reveal, but in how the evidence had been available all along. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," Harry would murmur, and the map would bleed ink like veins opening, painting the entire castle with secrets, every student, every professor, every ghost. And among them, hidden in plain sight, was a rat with a man's name. Peter Pettigrew. A name that should not exist, not after 12 years of supposed death. The Marauders' map does not lie. Remus Lupin, one of its creators, trusted it without hesitation. When he saw Sirius Black's name and Peter Pettigrew's together on the map, he did not doubt what it meant. "The map never lies," he said. That truth, so easily accepted by Lupin and ignored by Harry, underscores the tragic and brilliant deception orchestrated by the story's author. The map was revealing a ghost of betrayal, and no one was listening. The reason Pettigrew's name continued to appear was not magical error, but magical accuracy. The Marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew himself had enchanted the map to recognize individuals regardless of transfiguration, magical disguise, or invisibility. That Pettigrew was an animagus in rat form meant nothing to the map's magic. It knew what it knew, and it had been showing the truth all along. Peter's assumed death had been a cornerstone of wizarding history for over a decade. The narrative of his demise, blown apart by Sirius Black in a crowded street, had shaped Harry's entire understanding of his past. It was why Sirius was branded a traitor. It was why Harry had been raised by the Dursleys. And it was a lie. Pettigrew had faked his death, cut off his own finger, and vanished into the world of vermin, hiding as the Weasleys' pet rat Scabbers. What makes this detail so chilling is how frequently the truth was visible. Harry would glance at the map, see Ron in the Gryffindor common room, and beside him, Peter Pettigrew, a name floating right there next to Ron's dot, but Harry never questioned it. It was easier to dismiss than to explore, to assume a magical glitch than to entertain the impossible. Rowling carefully led her readers down this path as well, offering them the same crumbs that Harry overlooked. The map had revealed more than a name. It had revealed a presence. One night, when Harry used the map to sneak around Hogwarts, he saw Pettigrew's name moving toward him on the corridor. He panicked, hid, but eventually saw no one appear. The assumption again was that it had been an error. In truth, it was Scabbers, the rat, scuttling in the dark with a man's soul curled inside his form. The horror of this realization only comes later, when the mask is lifted and the rat becomes a traitor once more. This narrative device, hiding a villain in plain sight, is a masterstroke. The Marauder's map, built by the very hands of the man it would later expose, became an instrument of poetic justice. Peter had helped create a map that would eventually betray him. The irony is profound. He was not exposed by auras or by curses, but by the remnants of a friendship he had destroyed. Remus Lupin's eventual understanding of the map's truth marks a turning point. When he seizes the parchment and sees the names moving together, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Sirius Black, and Peter Pettigrew, it all aligns. It is the map, he tells Snape. It shows everyone. And in those words, the secret is unveiled. The dead man never died. The rat was a coward, a traitor, and a murderer. One of the most subtly powerful scenes occurs in the Shrieking Shack, when Sirius Black grabs Ron's pet rat and points to him, trembling with rage. "There's not much left of him," he says. The tension hangs in the air, the children confused and afraid, but the map had already said it all. The audience only had to believe it. Yet how can you believe a map when the world insists someone is dead? That Pettigrew's name appeared at all challenges the reader's assumptions about truth and trust. If Harry had truly examined the map more closely, if he had asked Lupin about the strange name earlier, the story may have taken a very different course. But Harry was young, untrained, and unaware of the map's full capabilities. He did not question what he saw, and so the rat remained hidden in daylight. The Marauder's map is not simply a tool for sneaking around. It is a mirror of the castle's soul. It displays lives, choices, betrayals. When Fred and George gave it to Harry, they handed him not just a map, but a legacy. It's tragic, then, that the first secret it whispered was dismissed. Harry, brilliant though he was still only 13, and some truths are too large for a child to grasp. The map's stubborn honesty elevates its role in the narrative. When Harry later uses it to track Draco Malfoy, when it reveals Barty Crouch Jr. disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, the reader finally understands that the map had always been accurate. It was not limited by physical form or magical deception. It could not be fooled, and that makes its early revelation of Peter Pettigrew all the more haunting. Sirius Black's fury at Peter is tied to this revelation. For 12 years, Sirius suffered in Azkaban for crimes Pettigrew committed, and all the while Peter slept in a boys' dormitory, fed crumbs, warmed by firelight. The Marauder's map had watched over them both. The same ink that labelled Sirius a fugitive labelled Peter a resident of Gryffindor Tower. It is unbearable in its injustice. There is a beautiful irony in the map's refusal to keep Peter's secret. He may have changed form, may have fled to shadows, but his name betrayed him again and again. It is as though the map itself, a product of their friendship, refused to allow him to vanish into anonymity. It dragged him back into the light with every heartbeat, every scurry across the floor, every night spent beside Ron. In that sense, the Marauder's map becomes a character in its own right. It holds memories, defies illusions, and refuses to participate in lies. It bore witness to Peter's betrayal and never stopped whispering the truth, even when no one listened, even when Harry dismissed it. The map stayed loyal, not to Peter, but to the idea that secrets must be seen. J.K. Rowling planted this clue so early and so cleverly that few readers noticed. It is a perfect example of what writers call planting and payoff. The name Peter Pettigrew on the map was planted like a seed in Book 3. The payoff explodes in the shrieking shack when the rat is unmasked. It is a storytelling technique of the highest order. The answer was always there, but you didn't ask the right question. In retrospect, that one name, floating innocently beside Ron's, becomes a symbol of suppressed truth. It is a haunting reminder that the past cannot be buried by lies. Pettigrew's presence was a crack in the official story, and the map, in its quiet honesty, allowed it to leak through. For all its power and grandeur, the wizarding world was undone by a piece of parchment, 4 names etched into legend, and a rat who could not hide from the truth. That is the real magic of the Marauder's map, not that it showed secret passageways, but that it held a memory deeper than death, and Peter Pettigrew, traitor of friends, could not escape it. Number 23, his wand died with him. Peter. Pettigrew's final moments in the cellar of Malfoy Manor offer more than just the culmination of a traitor's arc. They symbolize the tragic fate of a man who abandoned friendship, loyalty, and even identity. When his silver hand turned on him, tightening around his own throat at the command of the very master he had served with pitiful devotion, few mourned the rat who betrayed the Potters. But what became of his wand, his last link to the magical world, his tool, his weapon, his mirror, remains a mystery that whispers of symbolic closure. It is likely that, like Pettigrew himself, the wand died in that cellar, forgotten among the debris of a war more concerned with legends and heroes. Before Pettigrew ever clutched the wand that would become his in the Second Wizarding War, it belonged to one far more powerful, Lord Voldemort. That wand, made of yew with a phoenix feather core, was a twin to Harry Potter's. Voldemort's wand was as much an instrument of his soul as of his magic. But when Voldemort fell on Halloween 1981, the wand was lost, along with his body, and his followers scattered. Years passed before Voldemort returned, initially without a body, and it was during this phantom existence that Pettigrew found him again. Weak and without wand, Voldemort relied on Pettigrew, and when he rose once more, he rewarded Wormtail not with forgiveness, but with leftovers. Voldemort no longer used his original wand, and so it was handed to Pettigrew. This transfer is deeply symbolic. The wand had been created for a master, and now it was reduced to serving a coward. In Goblet of Fire, Voldemort says, "You returned to me not out of loyalty, but out of fear of your old friends." That fear earned Pettigrew a life debt from Harry Potter, but no respect. The wand, much like its new owner, had been reduced from legend to footnote. It had once battled Dumbledore and stood against Harry in the graveyard. Now it trembled in the hands of a man whose loyalty was transactional. When Pettigrew used the wand in Order of the Phoenix and Half-Blood Prince, it no longer inspired dread. Its very aura had shifted. Once a feared weapon, it now carried the shame of betrayal. Like its owner, it was tolerated but never honored, and yet it retained its core. The phoenix feather inside still pulsed with the echo of Fawkes, Dumbledore's companion. This juxtaposition, a noble core within an ignoble user, was also the paradox of Pettigrew's life. By the time of the events in Deathly Hallows, Pettigrew was no longer a significant player. Trapped between the hostility of the Death Eaters and the silent contempt of the Order, he became a prisoner of his own cowardice. His wand, too, was rarely seen. In Malfoy Manor, where Voldemort had taken up residence, Pettigrew acted as a jailer. He had authority over the dungeon, but no true power. His wand was not a tool of liberation but of confinement. When he descended into the cellar with orders to check on the prisoners, he carried his wand like a man who knew he might never return, and indeed he did not. In one of the quietest yet most significant deaths in the series, his silver hand crushed his throat in retribution for a moment of weakness, a brief hesitation to kill Harry, perhaps a flicker of humanity or maybe just confusion. Whatever the cause, it cost him his life. And there, in the cold shadows beneath the manor, he collapsed. The books never describe what happened to his wand, but there are no reports of it being taken, reused, or recovered. It is likely that the wand died with him, or was buried under the crumbling stones of the manor's foundations. No one went back for it. No one thought it worth saving. This is telling. In a world where wand lore is a sacred study and every wand carries a story, Pettigrew's wand simply vanished from the narrative. It wasn't snapped in punishment, as was the case with Lucius Malfoy's wand. It wasn't destroyed in defiance like the Elder Wand. It was simply forgotten. Wandmaker Garrick Ollivander once explained, "The wand chooses the wizard." But what happens when the wizard no longer has a place in the world? When he is unloved, untrusted, and eventually erased, perhaps the wand too loses its purpose. Perhaps it dies not by breaking, but by abandonment. The image of Pettigrew's wand, formerly Voldemort's, gathering dust beneath Malfoy Manor feels like a poetic echo of his life, once part of greatness, now irrelevant. The notion that the wand perished with him fits into a larger pattern in the series. Wands, like their owners, can have heroic or tragic arcs. The Elder Wand's long history culminates in a decision to end the cycle of violence. Harry's wand is broken and repaired. Ron's is snapped and replaced. In each case, the wand's fate mirrors the moral trajectory of its wielder. Pettigrew's wand, then, having passed from one who wielded it with terror to another who used it for cowardice, could only end in obscurity. There is no known record of any witch or wizard attempting to retrieve the wand. Not Draco Malfoy, not Narcissa, not even Voldemort himself. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione escaped Malfoy Manor shortly afterward, they made no mention of the wand either. It had, by that point, ceased to matter. Its magic, no longer feared or respected, had dissolved into silence. In the larger war, it was a relic of a failed man, a failed allegiance, a failed legacy. Consider the irony. The wand that had once stood opposite Harry's in priori incantatem, that had summoned echoes of Lily and James Potter, ended up in the possession of the man who betrayed them. That wand, like its owner, knew both greatness and disgrace. Its silence in the aftermath of Pettigrew's death says more than any act of destruction could. It is the silence of shame, of abandonment, of being unworthy, even of memorial. Even the act of casting magic with a wand is deeply personal. It's an extension of intent and soul. For a man like Pettigrew, who never had convictions of his own, whose life was a series of alignments with stronger personalities, James, Sirius, Voldemort, the wand became less a partner and more a crutch. He did not shape the wand, it was handed to him. It did not choose him, it was discarded into his care. And perhaps, like so many other things he held in life, he simply lost it. In contrast, look at Hermione's reverence for wands. Even a captured wand is treated with care. In Deathly Hallows, she identifies Bellatrix's wand by feel alone. Harry understands wand lore enough to question the morality of using another's wand, but Pettigrew never displayed that insight. He was a man content to inherit and obey. So it makes sense that when he died, his wand received no reverence. This fate is not only symbolic, but practical. Wands are deeply sensitive. They remember, they adapt. For a wand to pass from one user to another, especially across such vast gaps in magical ability and ethical clarity, is rare. Dumbledore in Half-Blood Prince said, "You are quite right. The wand chooses the wizard. That much has always been clear to those of us who have studied wand lore." This truth haunts Pettigrew's story. The wand he used was never truly his. The passage of the wand from Voldemort to Pettigrew is perhaps one of the quietest tragedies in the saga. It is not framed as a moment of betrayal or honor, but of practicality. Voldemort no longer needed it. Pettigrew was simply the next pair of hands. That dispassion echoes throughout Pettigrew's life. He was used, and when his usefulness ended, he was eliminated by the very hand Voldemort gave him. In a strange way, the wand shared Pettigrew's downfall, passed along unappreciated, marked by its past, and doomed to fade. It is unknown whether it even functioned properly by the end. Wands can resist users. Perhaps this one resisted Pettigrew. Perhaps it bent reluctantly, or perhaps it recognized in him a soul too fractured to harness its true power. Its silence in the narrative may be the only respectful thing offered to either of them. The cellar of Malfoy Manor, described in Deathly Hallows as dank and stone-lined, was a place of waiting, of captivity, of dread. It is fitting that both Pettigrew and his wand should find their end there. They began in fear, served in fear, and ended, poetically, in the same darkness they helped create. Neither left behind a legacy worth mourning, and so the wand lies, imagined, under dust and bone, beneath the ruins of ambition. No song was sung for it, no name etched in memory, no collector came to claim it, and that is perhaps the final judgment, not rage, not justice, but irrelevance. The wand, like the wizard, unchosen, unwanted, unremembered. Number 24, Pettigrew knew about the horcruxes. Peter Pettigrew was never the most prominent figure in Voldemort's inner circle, nor the most powerful, and yet he had a role no less crucial than any Death Eater who brandished their dark mark with pride. Beneath his cowardly demeanor and stammering voice was a man who carried secrets too dangerous for the world to know. Among them, a truth that even Dumbledore never spoke aloud. Pettigrew knew about the horcruxes, not all of them, not the whole ritual, but enough to be terrified, enough to understand what made the Dark Lord immortal, and what it cost. After his betrayal of the Potters, Peter disappeared from the wizarding world and took on the form of a rat, literally. As Scabbers, he was close to danger but safe from vengeance. He spent 12 years curled in the hands of Percy Weasley and then Ron, watching Hogwarts from the shadows, listening to whispers, feigning sleep while secrets unfolded before him. But Peter's true proximity to horror came not from his time as a pet, but from his years as the Dark Lord's only companion during Voldemort's spectral exile in Albania. Those years are largely ignored in the books, but they are not empty. We know from the Goblet of Fire that Pettigrew found Voldemort in the forests of Albania, where he had gone to recover his strength. Dumbledore, too, says in Half-Blood Prince that Voldemort vanished after attacking Harry into some distant dark place. But Pettigrew did not merely find a faint echo of his master, he served him there. He nursed a shadow back into existence, bringing rats for nourishment and concocting weak spells to give the Dark Lord a semblance of survival. It was in this secluded, haunted state that Voldemort would have been most vulnerable and most desperate. In that desperation, secrets slipped. Voldemort had little left to hide when he was less than spirit, sustained only by dark magic and Nagini's parasitic soul. And Peter, eager to redeem himself, became more than a servant. He became a confidant. In the long stretches of silence in the Albanian woods, when there were no Death Eaters, no war, no hope, Pettigrew heard things. He heard the mutterings of a disembodied lord speaking to no one, not rants, recollections, rituals, names, items, desires. It is important to remember that Voldemort trusted no one, but he used everyone. He would not have handed Peter a parchment with Horcrux scrawled in blood, but he might have spoken of the cup, the locket, the diary, objects he considered sacred. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore says, Voldemort liked to collect trophies. He references Hufflepuff's cup, Slytherin's locket, Ravenclaw's diadem. Voldemort's fascination with these objects was not merely personal, it was obsessive, and obsessions do not stay silent forever. Pettigrew was with Voldemort when Bertha Jorkins arrived, lured by Wormtail himself. And it is Bertha's memory that provides Voldemort the crucial information he needs to return to England and to his ancestral home. The ritual that resurrects him in The Goblet of Fire is not the work of an idiot. It requires flesh, blood, and bone, and a deep understanding of soul magic. It was not devised on the fly. Pettigrew had a hand in gathering the elements. His role is not just as a follower, it is as the one who enables Voldemort's return to flesh. In the graveyard scene, Pettigrew performs the ritual with a level of reverence and precision that suggests more than instruction. Bone of the father unknowingly given, you will renew your son. Flesh of the servant willingly given, you will revive your master. These are not the words of a man reading blindly. He believes in them. He understands their power, because by then Peter knew what Voldemort had done to preserve himself, and more importantly, he knew what Voldemort feared. It is striking that after Voldemort's resurrection, the Dark Lord immediately asks about the loyalty of his followers, but not once does he punish Peter for his 12-year absence. You return to me not out of loyalty, Wormtail, Voldemort says coldly, but out of fear. And yet Wormtail is rewarded with a silver hand. Why? Because Peter knew things. He was too useful to kill. That usefulness likely extended to Horcrux lore. Consider, when the diary is destroyed by Harry in Chamber of Secrets, it causes Voldemort pain, but not confusion. He never asks what happened to it. Why? Because he already knew it could be destroyed. He had accepted that the horcruxes were mortal objects with immortal purpose. He simply made more. But when Dumbledore destroys the ring in Half-Blood Prince, Voldemort still does not panic. Why? Because he knows some are hidden too well. Peter, the man who helped retrieve the locket from the cave, may have also been involved in hiding others. In the case of the cup, Voldemort entrusted it to Bellatrix, but Peter likely knew its nature. It was kept in the Lestrange vault at Gringotts, and Peter had been close to Bellatrix through Voldemort's inner circle. He would have heard rumours. More than rumours, he may have been the one to enchant protections. Peter's knowledge of dark enchantments is often overlooked, but in Deathly Hallows, chanced when the trio is captured and taken to Malfoy Manor, we see the home riddled with traps and spells. Peter operates in this environment with ease. He is not the frightened rat we remember. He is a man who understands the mechanics of the dark arts. His silver hand was not merely a gift, it was a leash. Voldemort bound Peter not just physically but magically, ensuring that even if he betrayed again, he would be punished instantly. But Peter's deepest understanding came from his role in Nagini's protection. Nagini, we later learn, was a living horcrux. Though the word is never used around Peter, the behaviour is unmistakable. In Deathly Hallows, Voldemort speaks Parseltongue to Nagini, keeps her in a protective sphere, and relies on her presence for anchoring his soul. Peter is seen feeding Nagini, tending to her, guarding her. No servant is given such access unless he knows the truth. If Peter knew that Nagini was not merely a snake, but a vessel, then he knew the purpose she served. He knew the risk if she were killed. And so his behaviour around her, almost reverent, is not just fear, it is awareness. He is tending to something precious, something that cannot be allowed to die, just like the diary, just like the locket. We also cannot ignore Peter's reaction when Harry, Ron, and Hermione confront him in the cellar of Malfoy Manor. His hesitation when Ron reminds him of the life debt he owes Harry is not merely moral confusion, it is the collapse of years of secrets. In that brief pause, the silver hand turns on him, crushing the life from him. The silver fingers closed around Wormtail's throat, Rowling writes. The silver hand seemed to have a will of its own. This is not just punishment, it is silencing. Voldemort ensured that Peter would never speak. Not about Albania, not about the ritual, not about the objects. But in silencing Peter, Voldemort revealed his greatest weakness. He feared that Pettigrew knew too much. The man who had hidden as a rat, the man who had betrayed his friends, had seen the soul of the Dark Lord split into shards, and perhaps had understood more than anyone else how fragile that soul had become. It is possible, though never confirmed, that Peter witnessed the creation of a horcrux, if not directly, then by the aftermath. He was there when Voldemort killed Bertha Jorkins. The book says, Bertha had told him everything, convinced that he could make her forget. He killed her. Why kill her after learning what he needed? Because he needed to split his soul again. It is likely that Nagini was made a horcrux after Bertha's death. If so, Peter was there. He saw it. Maybe not the spell, but the blood, the moment, the horror. Pettigrew's silence in the face of such knowledge is both his curse and his punishment. He could not warn the world nor protect himself. He could only survive. That was always Peter's core trait, survival. But survival comes with a price, and in this case, the price was knowing a secret too terrible to share. Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Peter made his choice long ago, but his abilities, the ones that let him stay invisible, listen, observe, made him the perfect vessel for dangerous truths. He was not brave, he was not loyal, but he was present. And in Voldemort's world, sometimes being present is enough to uncover the truth. Peter Pettigrew was not a mastermind, but he was a witness to the greatest crimes of the age. He knew that Voldemort had defied death, not through faith or prophecy, but through murder and mutilation of the soul. He helped him rise again with blood magic. He guarded his vessels. And in the end, he died not for betraying the light, but for knowing too much about the dark. Number 25. History erased his name. In the flickering lamplight of the Hogwarts library, buried between aged scrolls and dust-covered tomes, lies a silence that conceals more than it reveals. It is not just ancient magic or forgotten spells that evade notice. It is people, their lives, and sometimes their sins. Peter Pettigrew, a man who once sat at the Gryffindor table, a marauder who once signed a parchment beside James Potter, and Sirius Black, has been swallowed by that silence. The chronicles of the Second Wizarding War, preserved in wizarding textbooks and ministry archives, whisper of heroes and villains. Yet conspicuously absent is the man who betrayed his closest friends, who resurrected Lord Voldemort, and who sealed the fate of 2 generations. Peter's name is not forgotten out of mercy or forgiveness. It is erased. When the dust settled after the Battle of Hogwarts, names were etched into plaques, inscribed into medals, and folded into songs of remembrance. Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, even Severus Snape, whose loyalty was once questioned, found his place in the narrative. But Peter? He vanished like the rat he became. His actions shaped the final battle as much as any others, but the Ministry of Magic did not speak his name in public trials. He was not listed among the Death Eaters. His crimes were never read aloud in the Wizengamot, and when witches and wizards spoke of the brave, the traitors, and the lost, there was no mention of Wormtail. This absence was not born of confusion or oversight. Albus Dumbledore knew the truth. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, he told Cornelius Fudge, plainly, Sirius Black is innocent, Peter Pettigrew is alive. But Fudge, ever the politician, dismissed him with a thin-lipped smile. Truth, when inconvenient, is a burden, and Peter's truth was a weight that neither the ministry nor the public wanted to carry. A coward, a traitor, a man whose wand destroyed Cedric Diggory and sliced off its own master's hand to serve another. These were not stories the Ministry wanted to recount while rebuilding its reputation. Peter's greatest crime, the betrayal of James and Lily Potter, was never tried in court. He never stood before a jury. When Sirius Black was condemned without trial, Peter watched from the shadows. For 12 years he slept in the folds of Ron Weasley's bedclothes as Scabbers, a rat whose missing toe was the only clue to his identity. He watched the rise of Harry Potter, the child orphaned by his own whispered secrets, and did nothing. When he was unmasked in the Shrieking Shack, there was no redemption, only a plea for mercy. Even then his life was spared, not by justice, but by pity. Harry Potter, though young, understood the gravity of that moment. "I don't reckon my dad would have wanted his best friends to become killers," he said, offering a life Peter did not deserve. That decision would haunt them all, for Peter would go on to serve Voldemort, reviving the Dark Lord in the graveyard of Little Hangleton. It was his silver hand that bound Harry, his cowardice that made resurrection possible. Without Pettigrew, there would have been no Triwizard Graveyard Duel, no return of the Dark Mark. And yet his name remains absent from every parchment and record detailing Voldemort's return. Even after his final betrayal, turning against Harry once again in the Deathly Hallows, Peter's end was quiet, almost poetic. When he hesitated to strangle Harry in the Malfoy cellar, his enchanted silver hand, a gift from Voldemort, sensed weakness and turned against him. "You're going to kill me," he whispered, perhaps not understanding that mercy had long since fled him. The hand closed around his throat. No one mourned him. No one wrote an obituary. The man who once slept beneath the roof of the burrow died nameless in the dark. The post-war trials saw the public eager for names. They wanted villains to blame, figures to punish: Lucius Malfoy, Bellatrix Lestrange, Travers, Dolohov. Even those who fled were branded, but not Peter. The records at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement list him neither as deceased nor accused. There is no wand registered in his name, no final record of his death. It is as though, once again, he turned into a rat and vanished into the walls. It is as though history, ashamed of him, simply turned away. Why was he erased? Perhaps it was easier for the Ministry to forget. Peter Pettigrew did not fit the narrative. He was not a grand villain like Bellatrix, nor a tragic anti-hero like Snape. He was a man who betrayed his friends, not for ideology, but for fear. A man who followed Voldemort not out of loyalty, but because he could not bear to stand alone. His cowardice was too ordinary, his crimes too personal. There was no glory, no madness, only weakness, and that is harder to face than any curse. The Order of the Phoenix, too, rarely mentioned him. Though Remus Lupin knew the truth and lived through the pain of betrayal, he did not speak of Peter in public. Perhaps the wound was too deep. The Marauders, once 4, became 3, then 2. Lupin buried his pain in teaching, in war, in Tonks. Sirius Black, consumed by guilt and fury, spoke of Wormtail only when forced. "He's at Hogwarts! He's in Gryffindor Tower!" But even after his escape from Azkaban, Peter remained a ghost in conversation. The Daily Prophet, so quick to print speculation and scandal, did not report on Pettigrew's death. When they covered the Battle of the Seven Potters, they named the fallen Mad-Eye Moody, Hedwig, and even the injured George Weasley. But Peter's name, though he had been present and active within Voldemort's inner circle, did not appear. There was no headline that read, "Traitor meets end," no article detailing the strange justice of a hand turning against its master. Silence followed him, even in death. Hogwarts itself erased him. In the tapestry of students past, Peter's name is stitched, but the Marauder's map, though born of his own magic, never speaks of him again. The map, enchanted by the combined mischief of Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, should have revealed him. But when Peter returns in his animagus form in Prisoner of Azkaban, only Harry, Ron, and Hermione truly register the weight of the name. "Wormtail," Remus says quietly, but there is no celebration in the discovery, only the shattering of memory. Peter's wand, the tool of resurrection, was never catalogued. Ollivanders, who could name every wand he'd ever sold, made no mention of Pettigrew's return to his shop. The wand used to kill Cedric Diggory, to torture Bertha Jorkins, to bind Harry in ropes, vanished. It is almost as though Peter never existed in the Ministry's narrative. The files list Voldemort's inner circle, but omit the man who ensured the Dark Lord's return. It is not denial, it is deliberate omission. The omission grows more sinister when considering the fate of Sirius Black. Sentenced without trial, his life destroyed by Peter's lies, Sirius was never exonerated publicly. Though Kingsley Shacklebolt later acknowledged the truth in private, no public announcement was made. To clear Sirius would mean revealing Peter's survival. It would mean confessing to negligence, injustice, and conspiracy. The Ministry chose silence, and in doing so, Peter's shadowy existence continued, even posthumously. Even among Death Eaters, his name is spoken with disdain. Bellatrix never trusted him. Snape saw him as a leech. Voldemort himself referred to him as useless, his death a footnote. The silver hand, a gift, was a leash. It glowed in the candlelight of Malfoy Manor, a constant reminder of loyalty demanded, not earned. Peter, to the Death Eaters, was a servant, not a brother, and to the Order he was a stain. In the end, he belonged to no one. Perhaps the most chilling testament to Peter's erasure is in the stories told to children. They hear of brave Harry, noble Dumbledore, fierce Neville Longbottom. They hear of sacrifice, of love's power, of Snape's double life. But they do not hear of the man who held the wand as Voldemort rose from the cauldron. They do not hear of the rat who lived beside the boy who would defeat the Dark Lord. Peter is not a cautionary tale. He is not even a whisper. This silence speaks louder than any judgment. It is history's way of erasing shame. In the Goblet of Fire, when Voldemort calls Peter forward, he says, "You return to me, not out of loyalty, but fear." That sentence alone disqualifies Peter from any place among the remembered. Cowardice, even more than cruelty, disqualifies a man from history's pages. It is easier to forgive a villain than a weakling. And Peter, though he shaped history, was not strong enough to stand in its light. Harry, Ron, and Hermione carried the knowledge of Peter's truth like a private burden. They never told the prophet. They never testified. Perhaps Harry, ever merciful, chose to let him fade. Or perhaps he too felt that naming Peter gave him more importance than he deserved. There is a kind of justice in forgetting. Not vengeance, but quiet refusal to elevate. No portrait was painted, no grave was marked. Somewhere beneath the floors of Malfoy Manor, or perhaps in the corner of a shallow pit, Peter's body rests. If magic mourned him, it did so in silence, and if history remembers him at all, it is only through the memories of the few who knew how much he mattered, and how much he destroyed. Even in the Room of Requirement, a place that shows what is needed most, Peter's name was never summoned. It is as if the castle itself, ancient and sentient, deemed him unworthy. His life, measured not in valor but in betrayal, found no echo in stone or story. A marauder, yes, but also the one who ended the marauders. Peter Pettigrew mattered. He changed the world, but history, in its cruel wisdom, pretended he never did. Number 26, the only marauder who became a Death Eater. Peter Pettigrew was not always a traitor. He once stood beside James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin, 4 boys who roamed the Hogwarts grounds with youthful arrogance and the unshakable bond of brotherhood. They were the Marauders, creators of the infamous Marauders map. They roamed the Forbidden Forest, snuck into the kitchens, and defied curfews with joyful defiance. In their youth, they lived for each other, laughed in secret corners, and believed that the world was theirs. Yet only one of them would abandon that loyalty, not for power or belief, but for something far colder: fear. Peter was the only marauder who became a Death Eater, the only one who walked away from friendship into the arms of Voldemort. That singular act became the defining betrayal of the First Wizarding War. The betrayal was not sudden, though its consequences were. On the surface, Peter seemed harmless, even weak, next to the confident Sirius or the brilliant James. He was never the leader, rarely the mastermind. But Pettigrew watched, and he learned. In shadows, he absorbed the strength of his friends and quietly feared the day it would no longer protect him. That fear bloomed into treachery when Voldemort began his rise. Peter, sensing the danger, turned coat before the fight reached him. While Sirius and James fought for the Order of the Phoenix, Peter offered secrets to the enemy, whispering truths that would shatter lives. He was weak, Remus would say later, in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and we were fools to think he could handle the weight of our trust. Peter's weakness became a weapon. He did not have Voldemort's ruthlessness or Bellatrix Lestrange's madness, but he had proximity. As James Potter's secret keeper under the Fidelius charm, Peter was the last wall between Voldemort and the Potters, and he crumbled. "He's at Hogwarts," Sirius had screamed, wrongly accused, imprisoned for 12 years, while the true betrayer lived disguised as a rat on Ron Weasley's pillow. The others suffered, but none of them betrayed. James died protecting his wife and son, wandless, facing Voldemort head-on to give Lily time to escape. Sirius was falsely condemned for Peter's crime, losing not only his freedom, but the trust of the world. Remus, quiet and grieving, remained loyal to the Order despite poverty and rejection. Even in tragedy they held to their beliefs, but Peter crawled into the pocket of darkness and stayed there. He betrayed not just a friend, but the idea of friendship itself. And yet there was a time when Peter Pettigrew sat in the Gryffindor common room, laughing with the others, basking in the warmth of acceptance. Hogwarts gave him identity: Wormtail to their prongs, Padfoot, and Moony. He was part of something bigger than himself, a rare comfort for a boy often ignored. But that sense of belonging was conditional. He was always the least of them. When fear came knocking, Peter traded brotherhood for survival, deciding that loyalty had a price, and Voldemort could pay it in safety. The tragedy lies not only in the betrayal, but in its finality. While Sirius escaped from Azkaban and tried to rebuild his life, and Remus returned to fight in the Second War, Peter never looked back. He severed his ties so completely that he faked his own death, cut off a finger, and framed Sirius, ensuring that no bridge could ever be crossed again. He did not merely abandon his friends, he erased his past. For 12 years he lived as a rat, scurrying, hiding, lowering himself to the role of a pet just to stay unnoticed. No marauder fell so far. And yet his name lived on in whispers. Wormtail, Voldemort called him, resurrected from his lowly form to become the instrument of the Dark Lord's return. It was Peter who found Voldemort in the forests of Albania, Peter who performed the ritual that gave him a body. Flesh of the servant willingly given, you will revive your master, intoned the dark spell. Peter cut off his own hand to fulfill it. That sacrifice was not noble, it was fear, once more, disguised as loyalty. Even among Death Eaters, Peter was never respected. He was used. Voldemort saw him for what he was, not a warrior, not a believer, but a coward in search of shelter. He was not among the inner circle, not entrusted with power. He fetched, carried, served. Unlike Snape, who earned a complex respect through skill and duplicity, Wormtail was tolerated only because he was useful. And when he ceased to be useful, he was discarded. The irony is cruel. Peter betrayed his friends to save himself, Yet his life became smaller, more pitiful with each passing year, from marauder to fugitive, from wizard to rat, from boy to ghost of a man who had once belonged. The others fought for something. Peter only ever ran, and even running did not save him. In the end, he died not at the hand of an aura or a Death Eater, but by his own enchanted silver hand, gifted by Voldemort when he hesitated in killing Harry Potter. A brief moment of recognition, a flicker of the old friendship, cost him his life. Dumbledore once said, "Oissa, it is our choices that show what we truly are far more than our abilities." Peter chose fear again and again. He was not without intelligence. He learned to become an animagus, mastered deception, and played his part with frightening consistency, but he used his skills to serve himself. Where Sirius used his gifts to fight, and Remus to heal, Peter used his to vanish, to betray, to survive at any cost. There is a scene, small and often overlooked, where Peter hesitates. In the cellar of Malfoy Manor, with Harry captured, Hermione tortured, and Ron helpless, Wormtail is ordered to kill. But Harry reminds him, "You owe me, Wormtail." In the Deathly Hallows, Rowling writes, "For a split second Peter looked unsure, his hand wavered, and then the hand turns against him. That split second is the ghost of a marauder, the final echo of a boy who once called James Potter his brother. It is not redemption, it is regret." What makes Peter's story so tragic is not just what he did, but what he could have been. Among the marauders, he was not born evil. He was born small, insecure, desperate for approval. James gave him friendship, Sirius gave him pride, Remus gave him patience, Hogwarts gave him identity. And he gave it all away, not to become a ruler or a legend, but to avoid the pain of loss. His betrayal was born not of ambition, but of terror, and terror makes monsters out of men. James died with honor. Sirius died fighting. Remus died protecting the next generation. Each marauder left a mark, a legacy of defiance against darkness. But Peter's legacy is absence. No one wept for Wormtail. No one told stories of his bravery. His name became synonymous with treason, a marauder in title but not in soul. He was the cautionary tale in their legend, the flaw in their armor. The map he helped create never welcomed him again. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Lupin first sees the name Peter Pettigrew on the marauder's map, it is not pride he feels, it is horror. The map, designed to reveal truth, exposes the living lie of Wormtail's existence. It is poetic. The very creation of their youth turns on him. He betrayed the map, and it betrayed him. One cannot forget how he watched Lily and James die, knowing he had led the killer to their door. That silence, never intervening, never warning them, is louder than any spell. The baby he left orphaned grew up to face the Dark Lord alone, while Wormtail hid behind robes and rat skin. Harry's every struggle echoed Peter's cowardice. No marauder came back for him, not Sirius, who would have torn him apart, not Remus, who saw in him the ultimate failure. Not even in death was he welcomed. While James and Sirius might have stood together on the other side, Peter was alone. The boy who craved friendship ended up with none. His final breath was not remembered in song or stone, it was forgotten. In some way, Peter Pettigrew was the mirror held up to every wizard who ever asked, "What would I do if fear came knocking?" He was the answer no one wanted to give. Not all betrayals are loud. Some slip by in silence, in weakness, in the quiet willingness to watch a friend die rather than risk oneself. Peter did not scream when he betrayed James, he whispered. And it is that whisper that haunts the marauder's legacy. For even in the brightest stories of bravery, there lies the shadow of one who chose not to be brave. In choosing Voldemort, Peter chose the path without love, without honor, without memory. He burned the bridge behind him and walked alone into history's margins. A marauder by chance, a Death Eater by choice, a coward, remembered only for the damage he left behind.